Today is Mothering Sunday, a day when, if we have happy memories of our childhood, and most of us do, it's a joyful day when we remember, when we salute our mothers who were vessels of grace, who did all they could sacrificially to give us a joyful, full life. Indeed, they often gave up for themselves in order to feed us. In their love, they mediated between us and nature, protecting us from the cold, shielding us from the sun. They held us and they told us in love that we were special and we are unique, each and every one of us. They closed the gap between our hunger and the food we could neither prepare nor eat by ourselves. They closed the gap between our desire and the toys we couldn't reach. They brought us to the very shore of life, set the boundaries so that we could wade safely and grow in knowledge and in strength. But there comes a time in every life when children have to flee the nest and go and make their way in the world. We heard just that story today in the story of the prodigal son from the Gospel of Luke. And I think that children have to leave the nest. They have to make their way in life. Which is why, except for very small children, I'm very much against overprotection. Perhaps because, as an only child, I was overprotected. Because no matter how much we love our children, our nieces, our nephews, our godchildren, we have a duty to prepare the young for life in what can be a very difficult world. And that means preparing them for the hurts that will happen to them. And so we have to allow them, as they grow, to make mistakes and to bear the pain of these mistakes. Because these experiences develop character and also holds their judgments. Indeed, we often learn more from what goes wrong than what goes right. After all, once we've burnt our fingers once by touching something hot, we are always very careful thereafter. So sometimes, as worrying as it is, we have to allow the young the privilege of learning, painful as that process may be. Which is why, at this time of the coronavirus, though many of us want to desperately go and see our mothers, see members of our family, or be visited by our children, it isn't a smart thing to do because we put everyone at risk. We will unlikely see our daughter, who is expecting until after the baby is born, and perhaps not even then, because it is risky for us to do so. Risky for us, risky for her. And of course, going back to those who didn't have happy childhoods. We must remember also, it isn't just parents who can be difficult, but also children. But parents forbear and continue to love even the most difficult of children. But some children are damaged by unhappy childhoods. And a lot of people didn't have a particularly happy childhood. Philip Larkin, the poet, was one such casualty. If his poem, This Be the Verse, is anything to go by. It's a fairly raunchy poem, but I will give you one stanza. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself. If, like Larkin, our pain is deep, our tears are very real, and Mothering Sunday can be a very difficult Sunday for us to bear, and there's no use pretending it otherwise. So what shall we say of mothers, and for that matter fathers, who weren't good parents, or who were good to everyone else's children but their own? It's a delicate and a complicated matter, but nevertheless an important one, as some people are their memories, their bad memories. And many of those who are homeless on our streets today are there because of the trauma they experienced as children. Indeed, the heaviest load that some of us bear, some of us carry, are the memory, or is the memory of an abusive parents whom we cannot bring ourselves to forgive. Yet, it's precisely that which cannot be condoned that has to be forgiven. After all, what can you excuse? What you can excuse, you don't have to forgive. But what you can't excuse, what's unforgivable, that's what we need to find it in our hearts to forgive. Even as God, our Father in heaven, forgives the unforgivable in us. Indeed, we can't really fully appropriate God's forgiveness and rest peacefully in his hand until we come to the point where we can also find it in our hearts to forgive those who've hurt us, whoever they are, be they alive or dead. As the burden we carry, the hatred which festers in us, hollows us out and ultimately twists our very souls. But it's okay to have scars, as scars are wounds that are healed, even though they are still tender. But time and distance heals. And although parents do make a mess of things, millions of children who've no right to turn out well because they had very difficult home lives are doing incredibly well and are themselves good parents and well-balanced people. Perhaps you're one such child. However, if some of us feel anger on a day like today, and we recall our parents, we do so because we feel guilty that we have failed them more than they failed us. Yet just as we have to forgive what we can't possibly condone, so we have to accept forgiveness when there's no possibility of ever making amends, because we can never repay the sacrifice our mothers, our parents made for us. Our parents, our mothers in particular, are first and foremost vessels of grace, as grace is love and deserved. And sometimes it's more blessed to receive than to give. At least it takes a great deal more humility. And the love that a parent has for his or her child is, after all, a remarkable thing. Indeed, children often have no idea how much their parents have done, are doing, and will do for them. And we see this in the parable of the prodigal son, a story that perhaps should be entitled The Parable of the Waiting Father, because the young son, went off into a far country because he thought he knew everything, that he had all the answers. It is said that when we're 16, we think our parents are incredibly stupid. By the time we're in our early 20s, we're amazed at how much the old folks have learned in the last few years. We learn through experience, and the prodigal in the far country enjoyed life until his money ran out. A famine entered the land, and he fell as far as anyone could fall. And it was there and then that he came to his senses. And he realized that here he was doing a very menial, very unpleasant job. But if he returned to his father's house, even as a servant, not a son, he would be more comfortable and be far happier. And so he turned about and he made his way home. And the child who came home would have been a shadow of the young man who left. For time and experience and a hard journey would have changed him. But his father knew him and recognized him from a distance, and he ran to meet his son, who had been dead but who was now alive, who had been lost but was now found. Sometimes, like the prodigal, we too have to reach rock bottom before we begin to count our blessings and appreciate God our Father who loves us beyond any ability of ours to measure or to weigh. For while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So on this Mothering Sunday, we may not be able to visit our mothers or mothers to visit us. We can speak to them on the telephone if they're so with us. We can remember them in our prayers. And we can seek to rest in God's peace as we perhaps begin to lay ghosts to rest. Amen.